Pastor Derek, God has smiled on your request because BLF Canada 2 years ago just got involved in a camp. And there is a lot of construction to do, renovations, opportunity to bring young people to minister as counselor in French, in English, and in a bilingual camp. So opportunities is there. Last time was some 30 years ago. Why not send a team once every generation? I think it should be a bearable thing to do. So may the Lord bless you as you consider this. I want to invite you this morning to look at a passage of Scripture that will teach us some very important lesson. The passage is found in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 1 to 14. I am going to read the text, and I'm going to give you some homework. You are going to underline certain words, certain expressions, and then we're going to apply those to our lives. In chapter 21, verse 1 of John, we read the following. Afterward, Jesus appeared again. Please underline that word, again, to his disciple by the Sea of Galilee. Underline that, the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the son of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I am going out to fish. Please underline that, said Peter. And they said, we'll go with you. Please underline that. We will go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Please underline that. They caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore. But the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? Please underline that. Friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered, they said, throw your net on the right side. Please underline that, the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish. Please underline that. Towing the net full of fish. For they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. Underline that. When they landed, they saw fire burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Please underline that last sentence. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not broken. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Please underline this. Come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dare ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time. Please underline that. The 3rd time that Jesus appeared to his disciple after he was raised from the dead. God has been gracious to me through my entire life, and especially in the last 30 years of ministry. But there is one thing that I have learned when it comes to personal evangelism, when it comes to outreaches into the world, as churches, but also as individuals. There is one enemy that can be and has often been persistent when it comes to personal evangelism. That is discouragement. And when people are discouraged, sometimes it could be, well, I lost my job, I don't know what to do. It could be a relationship that broke down. It could be a diagnosis from a doctor that you were not expecting. But discouragement gets set in so deeply, the last thing that's on your mind is how you should communicate the gospel. Because I found one thing that's true. Discouraged people do not have a tendency to evangelize. That's a reality of the Christian life. Now, we have to understand here that this fish story that I just read to you, it has so many lessons to teach us. For example, whenever Jesus is involved in a fish story, he never goes fishing with a pole, a fishing pole. He always goes fishing with a net. So we should never minimize outreach in the entire community, fishing with a net. Doesn't mean you can't fish with a pole, but learn to fish with a net as well. Now, it's also interesting to me that this particular story I just read to you happened at the end of the ministry of Jesus. But if you were to look at Luke chapter 5, verse 1 to 11, you would soon discover another fish story. But not the same fish story. The fish story of Luke 5 was the beginning of the ministry of the disciples. That's when Jesus chose them. But this fish story we read this morning happened after 3 years of ministry. After the disciple had preached the message of the Messiah. After they had chased demons. Which one of us had chased demons recently, huh? And they've been with Jesus for 3 years. Now, Jesus had told them many times that he was going to have to go to the cross. Did they believe him? Not really. But Jesus went to the cross anyway. 3 days later, he rose from the dead, and he told them that he was going to raise from the dead. Did they believe him? Not really. So then, after Jesus is raised from the dead, now we find the disciple in a total, deep discouragement. And whenever people, even the disciple of Jesus, after spending 3 years with him, when the depression and the discouragement is so deep, you are in neutral. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. You don't know which way is up, which way is down. So you park yourself. That's exactly what the disciples did. And then Peter had supposedly a great idea. He says, I'm going back fishing. Oh, man. You know, when you are totally discouraged, you will have a tendency to do one thing. Go back to what you know. Yeah, that's why sometimes pastors go back to sell used cars. Because they used to do that. But you see, this is where discouragement can push you into. No longer in a ministry, but now I'm going back fishing. But notice, please, don't miss this. Notice all of the effect of Peter's sentence. I'm going back fishing. Then the other disciples said, what? We're going with you. Oh, discouragement is contagious. It is. But we need to learn, and please don't miss this. We need to learn that every single one of us has a circle of influence. Whether it is parents toward children, whether it is teachers with children, whether it is friends with friends, we all have a circle of influence. Now tell me, what is going to be that circle of influence? Positive or negative? How do you want to influence your society by the decision you will make? Because every decision we make does have ramification way beyond ourselves only. So Peter, unfortunately, here was not a very good influencer. Oh, you see, women. Yeah, women. Usually it's about 51% of our churches, pastor, or more. But women had told the disciples, Jesus rose from the dead. No, who's going to believe a woman anyway? But yet we fail to realize that the women were the last at the cross, they were the first at the tomb, and they were the first evangelists. They're the one that went and told the disciple that Jesus was risen from the dead. So never minimize what the woman has to say. But no, they did not believe the women. And have you noticed what it says in the text that I ask you to underline? This was the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after the resurrection. Man, we can be so stubborn. If there is one thing that's got to be awfully boring for God, you know what that is? Having to repeat himself. And say the same thing he has already told you, because you haven't budged, you haven't went anywhere, and yet it was clear the first time around. It was the third time that Jesus appeared with his disciples. Yet discouragement has settled deep in the heart of the disciple. If discouragement can happen to the disciple, it can certainly happen to any one of us. What are some of the lessons we can learn? Not only that your decision in life will have an impact on your circle of friends or family, but also that in this situation, when a man is discouraged or feel disillusioned, he has a tendency to go back to what he knows. Go back to your old job. Now, in order here to pull us out of discouragement, God sometime has to bring us back to the beginning. Now, the beginning is this. God now, listen carefully, it's important. God is about to teach his disciples a French lesson. Okay? You're with me? God is about to teach his disciples a French lesson. They caught nothing. Well, remember Luke 5? When Jesus chose the disciples, they were fishing all night and they caught nothing. Now after he's resurrected from the dead, they caught nothing. So where's the French lesson? That's a case of deja vu. That's right. Sometimes God has to take us in a miserable, discouraged situation and bring us right back to start again. That's how God works, because we don't get it. After 3 times, we don't get it. You see, one thing that I have so greatly appreciated in verse 4 and 5 is the word friend. Friend. After being so stubborn, after having spent 3 years with Jesus, you see, before I was in the ministry, I had a small business. And on occasion, I had people working for me. And if they would have behaved the same way the disciple behaved after three years, I would have fired them. I said, go and do something else. I'm going to start training a new bunch. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, friends. Oh, how tender. In our worst messed up situation, Jesus is there. He stands by the side of the Sea of Galilee. He looked at his disciples that have nothing in the boat, and he said, friend, that's the God I serve. And maybe you find yourself in a situation that is impossible today, and you are totally discouraged. Whatever context you're in, the context is not important, because you know that Jesus is still calling you friend. And you know what? If Jesus is calling you friend, don't be afraid. Come forward. He's there to receive you. Friend. What a beautiful word in a totally discouraged person in their life situation. With Jesus, the solution to our problem is a lot closer than we think. As close as the other side of the boat. Now, some of you may argue with me that the disciples, their problem was that they were all a bunch of lefties. It says in the text. I mean, Jesus got there and said, oh, you caught nothing? Throw the net on the right side of the boat. That means they've been fishing on the left side all night. No? You see, the solution to your problem can be as close as your left to your right. Now, think of it this way. What is the distance between total failure and absolute success? You know what the distance between the two is? Only the thickness of your boat. But man, sometime our boat is thick. You see, he says, throw the net on the right side of the boat, and not only they caught fish, but they caught big fish. 153 big fish. You know what's cool about this miraculous catch? It's not one of those little stories you hear in the back hall of a church when some man of the church went fishing. He said, oh, I got one, it was this long. And then 5 minutes later, he tells the same story. Oh, I got one, it was this long. No, those were real big fish. Jesus is telling the fish story here. So he's not lying. He's not stretching the fish or the truth. Wow. 153 big fish. You know what? We need to understand here that when it came to that fish story, the disciples tried to pull the net into the boat and they could not. So what did they do? They towed it, says the text. They towed the blessing of God. Imagine a blessing so big you got the tow truck that you need. Oh, it's cool, isn't it? This is the difference being totally discouraged and useless to being totally blessed with God, where you have to tow the blessing to bring it in to shore. Oh, friends, don't waste time being discouraged. Come to Jesus, the friend. He's waiting. And you know what? He says in the text, it's interesting that all of a sudden, Peter, who was so discouraged, now he goes for the 100-yard dash. Because now he gets it. Jesus makes the difference. Totally useless and discouraged and a bad influencer to someone who just, after fishing all night nonetheless, he does the 100-yard. What a powerful message. Oh, you see what we find in this text over here. Now the disciples come to shore. And you know what they see? You read it with me. Jesus is cooking a barbecue. Can you, with the eyes of your imagination, smell the bread? Almost, you work all hard. You can taste that fish that's cooking nearby, that Jesus is cooking. And then Jesus says to his disciple, come and have breakfast. Oh, how many of us here today need to have a breakfast experience with Jesus? Because we are so way down because of our situation that we're still like Peter, totally discouraged and ineffective. I invite you this morning to come to the breakfast that Jesus has put before each one of us by calling you friend and inviting you to breakfast. I have a few more minutes for a story. Yes, somebody's going to wave at me because I'm not good with looking at my watch. I want to tell you my personal experience in coming to a breakfast with Jesus. I had just turned 18 years old. I knew that God was calling me to full-time ministry from the age I was 15. Couldn't speak a word of English, and I wanted to go to Briarcrest Bible College and Seminary. So I knew that I needed to learn English. So I left Quebec, went to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, found a job. Praise the Lord for this. I was working for concrete drainage pipe, and I was working hard to save some money, learn English from Germans and Ukrainian nonetheless. So if you think I've got a funny accent today, blame the other guys in Saskatchewan. I done the very best I possibly could. But while learning English, saving money to go to Bible school to serve God, one day I was driving a forklift, part of my job. And because it was early fall, and the guys were getting cold outside if they were working in the yard, while the forklift was going forward into the shop, they would have a tendency to just kind of jump on, get a ride, and then get inside. A 17-year-old young man, one of my friends that I sought to witness to, did this one day as I was driving the forklift. He came in the blind spot, assuming I was going straight. And as you well know, some of you that have operated those machines, they can turn on a dime. I did a 90-degree angle to park the vehicle outside. And what we could best deduct is that he had tried to jump on. Then the wheel of my machine went over his body. And the next thing I heard was, his head was about yay thick. And now I still did not know that this had happened until I got off my machine and looked at the back tire. I said, where is? And there was some gray matter steaming out of the tire because it had stuck to it. And then on top of that, I went and got some help right away. But then the big boss came out, and he started to pull his hair out, and he was absolutely convinced that it was him that had ran over the guy. Now, I had my biggest test in my Christian life so far. Do you know, when you're somewhere, a strange place, you're there to learn a language, and you still do not master the language whatsoever, you know how easy it is to keep it zipped when especially somebody else had taken the blame? All I had to do was... And then I said, no, that's not right. I saw the evidence on the back of my tire. I said, not him, me. And then the two other brothers of this young man that were working there jumped on me, and the police officer had to separate them so I wouldn't get harmed. And in the meantime, I got a phone call from my parents. They were ready to give up the farm, and they asked me if I wanted to take the farm over. Now what do I do? Do I flee? Do I leave everything behind, become a farmer? Nothing wrong with that, by the way. I have been on a farm for 17 years of my life. But I knew that I was called to full-time ministry. And the next day, I went back to work at the same place for another 8 months. By God's grace. God brought me through Bible school years and then through ministry. But I needed to have my breakfast with Jesus. I don't know what your situation is personally in your family, but I want to testify to God's glory today that if you come to Him, to your friend, and you tell him how bad it hurts, you tell him what kind of an injustice you may have suffered, you tell him how deep it cuts, He's going to say, come, have breakfast with me. The Lord bless you.